Hello and welcome to the Rising Generation Leadership Podcast with me, Errol Lawson. In whatever environment God has placed you in, as his son or daughter, he expects you to lead, to set a godly example for others to follow. The Rising Generation Podcast is where we equip you to lead effectively. On each episode, I interview Christian leaders with national and international influence and ask them questions about their leadership journey. Hopefully, their answers will inspire you to make an impact in your generation. Thank you for listening. Hello and welcome to the podcast today. And I'm really particularly excited today to announce that I've got with me Perry Marshall. Perry Marshall, if you've not heard of him, has launched 2 revolutions in sales and marketing. In pay-per-click advertising, he pioneered many of today's best practices and wrote the world's best-selling book on internet advertising, The Ultimate Guide to Google AdWords. Most recently, he's applied the 80-20 principle to more facets of business than any other author, being the first to expand on the 80-20 as an infinite fractal law of nature. 80-20 is a central lever for nearly every profitable strategy in sales, marketing, and business. His book, 80-20 Sales and Marketing, is required reading in many growing companies. Works also include the bestseller Ultimate Guide to Facebook Advertising, Evolution 2.0, Breaking the Deadlock Between Darwin and Design, and Industrial Ethernet. He's referenced in dozens of influential business books by authors like J. Conrad Levinson, Mark Joyner, Joel Comm, and Mari Smith. He shared the stage with Barbara Cochran, Brian Tracy, and Les Brown, and has consulted in over 300 industries. He's one of the world's most expensive and sought-after marketing consultants. Direct marketing maverick Dan Kennedy says, if you don't know who Perry Marshall is, unforgivable. Perry is an honest man in a field rife with charlatans. He has a degree in electrical engineering and lives in Chicago. Perry, that's a pretty full bio there. If you wouldn't just mind taking a moment to fill in any gaps there, anything I've left out, you think it's worth sharing, and give us a glimpse into your world right now.
Well, thanks for interviewing me, and I appreciate what you're doing. And, mixing kingdom and business it's tricky stuff. It's a tricky equation, not like a simple one. There's a reason why Jesus said, wise as serpents and gentle as doves. And it's like getting 2 college degrees instead of 1. So you got your degree in dove and you got your degree in serpent.
Wow.
Okay. And really, that's kind of it. And I think most people significantly either fall on one side or the other and struggle to do both together. Let's see, a couple more things that you might find interesting. I've got 6 kids, which I can almost not believe. Wow, that's a big family. 2 of them are adopted. We got 2 kids adopted from China for the regular way. That's been quite an adventure. My wife, she is an adoption maven, and she's, part of the adoption community, and that's a really great thing. And I have to say that being involved in that has given me a lot of insight about business and people, because you think of adopted kids as orphans, but really everybody's an orphan. And if you want evidence of that, look no further than your nearest epic story movie, like just about any. So Luke Skywalker's an orphan, and Frodo and Lord of the Rings is an orphan, and the Karate Kid's an orphan, and the Lion King is an orphan, and Bambi is an orphan, and Snow White is an orphan, and Cinderella is an orphan. And seriously, a lot of people have never actually thought about this, but I've got a friend, Joshua Russell, who's a film director and a screenwriter. And one time we're having breakfast and he goes, so Perry, if you want your audience to bond with your main character really quickly early on in the movie, what do you do? And I go, I don't know. And he goes, kill one of his parents. And you will see this in movies. Okay, why is this? Well, it's because everybody feels a little bit abandoned. Everybody feels a little bit tossed into the middle of the lake.
That's really good.
And so business leaders, this is what you're actually dealing with. You know, all your employees are orphans, and all of your customers are orphans, and all your vendors are orphans. And they are looking for, and this is normally not at all obvious until it's almost like somebody has to point this out, but they're actually looking for some level of kind of scratching that orphan itch and feeling a little better about the situation, hopefully because they've done business with you. And so it's very interesting.
So where did this journey begin for you? First of all, the journey of faith. I know you're a passionate Christian, passionate about your faith. Where did that journey begin for you?
It started very young. I think I was 4 or 5, and I was out by myself, and it was night, and I was looking up in the sky, and I just had this big epiphany. It was like, hey, somebody made all this. And I just connected the dots to, you know, what I've been hearing in Sunday school. I was like, okay, I get it. All right, God, you know, I don't even remember what I said. But it was like, I want you in my life. I'm with this program. And, you know, and I think a lot of times when kids come to faith, it's almost like not a big deal. You know, it'll just sort of kind of happen if the situation is right. But then where the rubber really meets the road is later on. Plus, I was also a pastor's kid.
Okay. That's really interesting, because if you at some point you decided to go into the field of business, and you know, a lot of the time people say, well, the number one kind of position in Christendom is to be the pastor or to be in full-time ministry and everything else. Oh, you know, you don't want to do that kind of thing. Was there a grappling for you? Was there a wrestling for you? How did you navigate sort of being a Christian, a pastor's kid, and then going into the whole marketplace and still being on fire for God?
So that's a great question. And what you just said is really spot on, because where I grew up, a secular profession really was kind of implied, at least, as being second class. Okay. And it's not that anybody came out and said that, but, you know, there just didn't really seem to be a grid for looking at the market. I was like, no, obviously everybody can't be a pastor. But it was almost like there was almost this simple, yeah, I know, you know, somebody needs to wire the telephone poles with electricity, and somebody needs to do the plumbing, and somebody needs to deliver the groceries. But boy, you know, some people are called. You know,
right.
and they wear the suit, and they carry the big Bible and all of that. And, you know, I hate to say this, but I think it's true. I had a very good friend say yesterday to me, he goes, you know what? The church in the United States is finished.
Wow.
It has consigned itself to irrelevancy. And, you know, that's the honest truth. I mean, and I'm talking in the broad, sweeping generality, okay? I'm not talking about, I mean, I'm surrounded by passionate people, and I go to a great church, and I'm not saying there aren't pockets of, but in the larger society, the church has lost all of its credibility and all of its relevance. And a lot of it is because, you know, that attitude that I was describing, that I grew up in, it's very, very ivory tower. Okay. And it's very disconnected from the needs of the world. And there's all kinds of things that are implicit in it. And I think one of the first things that's implicit in it is that the number one job of the church is for a preacher to preach. Well, I don't know. Like, if you actually read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, do you actually come to that conclusion? What did Jesus do? He healed people. He solved riddles. You get the woman caught in adultery out of her mess. You know, he fed the 5,000. There's all these things that go on, and none of them actually fit into any neat little grid. Okay. Plus, you have the fact that for the most part, in the Protestant church in the West, they've completely gotten rid of the miraculous and the prophetic and all of that. They have banished it, which, as far as I'm concerned, they have therefore banished the Holy Spirit. So good luck with whatever you got left. You might as well cut off one testicle. And I encountered that issue about 10 or 15 years ago. And so where I grew up, it was like, we don't want any of that here. Okay. And then later, in churches I went to after that, it was like, don't ask, don't tell. They weren't down on it, but they just didn't want to have people arguing about it. So they just kind of tried to not deal. But my brother, who I was very close to, of course, he grew up as a pastor's kid too. But not only that, he didn't go into the marketplace. He went to seminary. And then when he's done with seminary, he became an undercover missionary in China teaching English on the side.
Okay.
And in 4 years of living in China, he went from zealous evangelical missionary to almost atheist.
Mm-hmm.
His faith completely unraveled. And I guess one way of describing what that was about was he had been given a perfectly coiffed Excel spreadsheet of exact answers of how all the world works and all the theological propositions and everything else. And he started finding out that spreadsheet was from an ivory tower. And it did not match the real world. Right. And there was all kinds of things that didn't add up.
Right.
And the whole spreadsheet started unraveling. And then you change this cell, and then this one changes. Pretty soon, the whole thing had just fallen apart. And he was asking tons of questions, and the emails were going back and forth. And this was raging for about 2 or 3 years. And there was one point where he goes, I've studied Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic. I've been through the New Testament inside and out. He goes, nowhere does it say that miracles are going to go away after the disciples are gone. So where's the miracles, Perry? And I'm like, let me check with my sales manager and get back to you. Because I didn't know. I mean, I rifle through my mental file folders and it's a big blank. It's not actually entirely blank. I think almost all Christians, no matter where they come from, they've bumped up against things that defy explanation.
So how do we then, if you imagine that, we know in the end, we know who wins in the end, right? We know that the church is victorious, or that we know that the end of the story, so to speak. And we see in the business sense, then industries today being disrupted everywhere. So Uber and the taxi industry and Airbnb and hotel industry and in other places, people are having to adapt and change with the times in order to still remain relevant and be effective. Is the church then ready, ripe for disruption as such? Can we use that term?
I think it's inevitable. Okay, business as usual hasn't been working. And, to just continue my story, I had just started going to a spirit-driven church not too long before that conversation happened with Brian. And I was sticking my toe in the water. Well, I'll tell you, if you want to hear the whole story, just go to coffeehousetheology.com/miracles, and you can read the story. But I found out there's a ton of miracles, and there's documented miracles, and there is case studies, and there are books, and there are videos, and there are testimonies all over the place. And miracles absolutely do happen. Even the atheists sometimes will grudgingly admit that this is the case, and that there's a whole world that most people just pretend doesn't exist. And the miraculous is real, but I don't see how the church cannot be disrupted. And part of the problem is this, it's exactly this belief that people in the marketplace are somehow second class. Well, Jesus recruited fishermen, and at least to some degree, they were still fishermen all along, right? And Paul was a tent maker, and as far as I can tell, he had a really respectable tent making company. And, you look at the patriarchs, most of them were savvy businessmen, industrialists, heads of state. You look at Solomon, you look at David, or you look at Daniel. Okay. Daniel was a badass government administrator of absolutely first rate quality. That's what he was. You go read that book. He is a man in the marketplace.
Absolutely.
In fact, he's in charge of the astrologers, okay? Which means that he has learned to be comfortable in tremendous levels of ambiguity.
Wow.
Okay? I mean, think about that. All right. And like maybe the rank and file doesn't know this, but the high ranking people know that, well, you know, when our guys can't solve it, go get Daniel because he'll be able to solve it. Okay? Where did that wisdom come from? Or how about Joseph? Joseph was running Egypt. He wasn't an altar boy. He was running a country. Okay. You know, I love Lance Wallnau's 7 Mountains thing, which is Christians should occupy the highest levels of every segment of society, and they should be speaking into what's going on. And if you're going to do that, you absolutely must be wise as serpent and gentle as dove. And, you know, and a lot of times we've given doves a serpent spreadsheet and it's never actually been tried. And then when they go out and they find out that it doesn't work, they blame the student instead of the teacher for what didn't work. I mean, that's what happened to my brother. I mean, you know, half the people from his seminary won't talk to him anymore. Well, you know what? I guess that issue's between them and God. Let's just put it that way.
So you've navigated this journey and you're confident and comfortable in the position that you're in now as a Christian. Were there stages? Your brother had his experience. What was going on for you to decide that, you know what, I'm going to business. Forget what the status quo is. Forget what the old order is. This is what I'm doing and I'm going to be okay with that.
Well, first of all, you know, sometimes there's just things you know, and I'm glad that I was willing to just know something instead of having to, like, explain it. And I just somehow knew that, like, I don't belong in the professional ministry world. I belong in the marketplace. I just knew I belonged in, and it was sort of like a Wolverine knows that he's not supposed to sit inside the patio door on shag carpet and go eat at his food bowl every day. A Wolverine knows that he's supposed to be out in the woods hunting animals and defending his territory. And, you know, some people are just Wolverines.
And what's the lesson there, do you think, to somebody who's maybe at the beginning of that journey?
Well, I got to tell you, like, there is nothing second class about being in the marketplace whatsoever.
Amen.
Okay. I mean, the marketplace is not second class in the Bible.
Come on, man.
Okay. Here's what I believe. The Bible talks about apostles, prophets, evangelists, teachers, and pastors, the 5-fold giftings. I believe that all 5 of those gifts exist just as much in marketplace people as they do in ministry people.
Now you're talking. And so what's the qualification then? Because I think there's a qualification somewhere for somebody to be in leadership, if that makes sense. So let me say, I think that what qualifies, perhaps in the old order, what qualified the person who's leading the church to be leading the church was their devotion. Their commitment, their devotion to study the word, to pray, to seek the face of God. And the sheep, perhaps, looking to the pastor, were in most cases not as committed, not as dedicated, sold out, and relied on, as a dependency culture almost, on the leader to hear from God, to pray for the people. And I think what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing you saying is that actually that qualification is for all of us, whether we're in the marketplace, whether we're in a church. Like, we should all have that connection, that intimacy with God, and be serving wherever we are in those gifts.
Well, yeah. So, you know, you expect a pastor to be faithful to his wife and not have a bunch of bad habits and not be a drunkard and all that. You know, frankly, a board of directors' expectations of their CEO isn't much different.
Come on.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember when Bill Clinton got into his whole thing with Monica Lewinsky, Dan Kennedy wrote a little thing in his newsletter, and he goes, if any CEO in America had done that, his board of directors would have had his head on a stick. right? Like, you're not allowed to be banging your intern when you're the CEO or president of the company, right? Like, I mean, we expect people to have moral integrity and be in control of their finances and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, a pastor is a higher standard than a CEO, but I mean, it's not that much higher. Like, if you're going to run a business over a long period of time, you have to be a steady, trustworthy person. And you have to be a good leader. And you will find that most successful business people are married. They have a family. They take care of their family. They're trustworthy. They do what they say they're going to do. They're good people. They're not off getting in trouble all the time. And they're not drinking everywhere. And they're not chasing skirts. And, so like there's not actually that much difference. Yeah. But the difference is there's way more contact, right? Sunday is like, a couple hours a week, and the workplace is 40 hours a week, or maybe 50 or 60 even, and so you have a lot of influence over people, and you have a lot of impact in creating the culture. And a company is not just a bunch of transactions and systems. It's a culture. Okay. And, if you read books about business culture, it's a very vital part. And if you take kingdom culture and you embody it in a business, it's going to be a great business to be part of. Okay. Awesome. So, I just knew that my place to be in the world was in the marketplace, and that I was going to, little by little, I was just going to figure out how to embody what I believed in the marketplace.
Great. What's been your biggest challenge along the way?
It's probably just the actual challenge, the day-to-day challenge of actually running a business and dealing with the constant changes in the marketplace and, developing myself and being in competition. But I mean, there's so many ways to answer that question. I mean, I've been married for 26 years. There have been seasons of our marriage that were not fun. Whereas, I was talking to somebody about this once, and, she goes, yeah, there are just some years where the shareholders do not get a dividend. And if you're going to be in any long relationship with anybody in any context, then there's going to be the ups and downs, right? Another really big learning curve for me is moving from, where I grew up and how I was raised, it was all about the principles and the rules. It was all about doing the right things, and up to a certain point, that's all great. But there's a higher level, which is moving in the Spirit, which, by the way, does not negate principles, does not replace doing the right things, does not replace strategic thinking or anything like that. I think there's a real kind of a split that goes on where, there's the hippie woo-woo people that are really happy to just flow in the Spirit, and and that's really, really super great, but they don't have any structure. They don't have any discipline. They don't have a plan. They don't have a strategy. They don't have a tactic. They think they're just going to, pick up the guitar, start playing. The Spirit's going to move, and everybody around them is going to come to Jesus. And, it doesn't really seem to usually work that way, right? But then you have the other people, and they're like, well, we're going to follow the rules. We're going to do the principles, and we're going to dot the I's, cross the T's, and do the accounting. But there's no spirit, there's no life, there's no improvisation, there's no flow. And, I think the real high art, the real challenge is to wrap your arms around both sides.
Right.
And if you're weak on one side, then you either need to find some way that you can deal with it, or hire the right people, or partner with the right people. And the fact that you see things differently means there's going to be conflicts. But I just think you have to have both sides. And it's been quite an adventure of learning to listen to the Spirit and, getting that other sense of direction, which I think is increasingly important in a commoditized world.
Awesome. And do you I think it was John Maxwell that says success is hidden in your daily routine. What does typically ideally, I know this is flexible and it changes all the time, I can imagine, but what does the first 90 minutes of your day look like?
Well, about 2 years ago, I started getting up at 6 and journaling for an hour, and basically that's my prayer time. And I've actually gotten to be very consistent about that. I'm kind of religious about just getting that in. And sometimes there's adjustments for one reason or another, but I always manage to get it in. And it's I'm just going to work that muscle. I'm going to work that muscle.
Do you have a structure for that? Is there a template or a model that you use for your journaling?
It's really the Artist's Way template, which is a book by Julie Cameron, which is open notebook, pen in hand, go.
Just write whatever comes to mind.
Start writing whatever comes. And, even if you have to say blah, 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 I can't think of anything. Well, you're thinking of that. So write down blah, 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 I can't think of anything until something starts to come.
Right.
And, I think that book it's not a Christian book, but it's a spiritual book. And it kind of takes the approach that, the muse is willing to speak to whoever will listen. So start listening and then start writing, because it's not just about listening. It's about a flow. It's about bringing it in and then writing it out. Now that works particularly well for me because I'm a writer. So that kind of engages with what I naturally do, and other people are going to be different. Some people are going to go on a run or a bike or whatever. Right. But I got that out, whatever comes. And that's been probably the biggest spiritual shift in my life. I mean, that combined with a couple of other things was probably the biggest change of direction that I could describe. Wow.
And how do you define success now at this stage in your journey? You've got best-selling books and you're well-known in the industry of marketing. You're a world changer. How do you define success now at this stage?
Well, I want to be clear that I think it'd be very easy for a lot of people to go, man, wow, Perry, you can walk into a bookstore and you can see your own book and, and there's all this stuff that's going on and you're sort of famous. And and that's great. But I also want you to just remember that, well, that's just normal for me. Right. And that I am trying to bust through the limitations that I'm up against, and it doesn't matter who you are looking at. It could be Michael Jordan, it could be Tiger Woods, it could be, the president of some company down the street, it could be the president of the United States. No matter who they are, there are things they want to accomplish, and they're not there yet, and they're just as frustrated as you are. Okay. And I am. I mean, I have lots of frustrations. I have lots of things that I am pressing against, and all of the stuff that I have is just what I bring to whatever is next. Okay. And everybody's running their own race. And I remember a conversation probably 20 years ago with my wife, and I was talking about these people I admired, and I was like, Mike this and George that and this guy this, and and Laura's like, Perry, these guys are 15 years older than you. You're comparing yourself unfavorably, and you're all frustrated, and she had a major point. I mean, this is one of the great things about a spouse, right? It's hey, honey, just take it easier on yourself. You're making progress. You're doing okay. Look at where you are this year compared to last year. You're on your journey. And that's really important. Everybody has their own truly unique selling proposition. It's your DNA and it's your personality and it's all this stuff. And, you really have to not put yourself on somebody else's treadmill.
So what have been the key habits that have contributed to your success then, if you can call it that you've implemented in your life?
There's a lot, but, Ravi Zacharias, I don't know if you know him. He's a brilliant guy, kind of a Christian philosopher. He pointed out something really insightful once. He pointed out that King David always had prophets speaking into his life, and Solomon didn't.
Wow.
Okay? And one of the key things is I have people who speak into my life who they know what's going on and they are very honest, and I entrust myself to their care. Okay?
Right.
That is very important. Another thing is I've said for years, I would not be caught dead not in a mastermind group. And usually if you want a group to be any good, you have to pay for it. And usually they're expensive. You know, and I pay for mine. And, you know, and it's funny because there are a lot of mastermind groups that I could go to for free because I'm at a certain stature. But you have to understand that those would not be quality enough to push me to the next level. You know, whatever is at a higher level from where you're at is probably going to be a stretch and a sacrifice. I have invested heavily in education. I have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on my education.
Wow.
Now, you go, wow, like we all know people who went to college and spent over $100,000
on a degree, an MBA or something like that.
Right. Okay. You know, any MD has probably spent $300,000 to $500,000 on their education, and nobody thinks twice about it. Well, why do you think entrepreneurial education is any cheaper? It's not.
That's a good point.
And Christians in particular tend to be cheapskates. I had a consultation with a lady once, and she wanted to coach Christian business people. And I said, well, go into the business world and pull the Christians out of it. Go into the educational world where people are accustomed to spending, you know, $1,000 or $2,000 on a home study course, or where they're accustomed to spending $10,000 or $20,000 to be in a coaching group for a year. Go into that world and pull the Christians out of it. Do not go to the church world and hope to find the people there that are going to spend the money, because you won't find them. I think Christians have a deep confusion between humility and mediocrity. The two are completely separate and different.
Explain, please.
Well, okay. If you're humble, it means you're teachable. It means you are keenly aware that you could make a big mistake. You are keenly aware that you're only one bad step away from a whole chain of disasters, and that you need wisdom everywhere you can get it, no matter how smart everybody thinks you are. Okay? That has nothing to do with how good you are at what you do. But a lot of people think that if they just are average, that their pride won't take over. Well, that's true. Well, that's probably not true, but it's sort of true. It's like, well, yeah, you know, if you're a mediocre guy working a mediocre job, you're never going to end up with a personality like Donald Trump. That's true, right?
Yeah, it's fear, it sounds like.
Yeah, but that's fear, okay? And, you know, Jesus told the story of the talents, and the guy that is very talented
He's settled
afraid.
for
He was
mediocrity.
like, you fool, like, get out of here. You totally did not get it, right? I am really sorry, but I think the vast majority of Christians, that parable has gone right over their head. And they are not trying to be excellent. They are not trying. And see, here's the thing. When you decide that you're going to be successful, well, first of all, now you have to pursue it. And now you're investing your talent. And as soon as you start investing your talent, that thing's invested, and you can't just go do anything else with it tomorrow, right? Like, you know, you take money and you stick it in. You can't just, you can't take it out tomorrow morning and go, oh, I think I'm going to go do something else, right? You have to commit to something, right? It's like, I'm going to start this restaurant. Well, so that means the whole next 2 years of your life are going to be bedlam and chaos, and maybe it's going to work and maybe it's not. And you don't get to sit there and second guess, oh, you know, I should be at the Wednesday night prayer meeting. No, you need to be running your restaurant tonight, right? You're not going to be doing that stuff, right? And so you have to commit to something. And then if you become successful, now you have choices. Okay. Oh, Well, I have $1 million and I get this guy calling me from the homeless shelter and they need money for the homeless people. And I got the hospital and they need this and the missionaries need that, and the Heart Association needs this. And, before I had $1 million, all I could say, well, sorry, I don't have the money. No. And that was easy. But now I have to decide not to give them the money because even though I have the money, I'm going to give it to somebody else. And that's scary because now I have power. God wants us to have power.
Come on.
If you disagree, then just go read Psalms or Proverbs or like Jeremiah or Joshua or whatever. Okay?
It's great, man.
God wants us to be powerful and he wants us to be comfortable in power. He made Joseph powerful. He made Daniel powerful. All of the prophetic passages about the restoration of Israel, it's all about having power. Well, okay, so pursue your power.
So we mentioned fear, but what's stopping people then from grabbing a hold of this realization, this truth?
They're afraid of powerful people. They believe absolute power corrupts absolutely, so that means good amount of power corrupts people by a good degree, and so power equals corruption. So, I don't want any of that. And that now they have bought into the lie of burying their talent. And you are going to be called to account for what you did for that talent. And there's that verse in Revelation, because you are neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. Okay, the uncommitted.
It's great.
You become a real woman or a real man. You become a real leader by committing to things and making them right.
It's great, Perry, man. Couple more questions for you. First of all, what's your biggest weakness?
I barely have an administrative bone in my body. And if my wife and my staff weren't all telling me when to show up and all this other kind of stuff, I would be a complete mess. And, if you're weak at something, then just figure out how you compensate. Weaknesses are always the flip side of certain kind of strengths. And so you live in your strength and you delegate your weakness. And I think it very much works to my advantage to be honest about my weaknesses. Weaknesses endear you to people. Every superhero has a fatal flaw.
Yep, Achilles heel.
Yep, they all have one. They would not be likable if they didn't. The reason that women like Oprah is she struggles with her weight, so that humanizes her. If Oprah was a supermodel, she would not be popular.
Wow.
So it's a blessing that Oprah is not a supermodel. It probably doesn't feel that way sometimes, but it's true.
And what's your biggest strength?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm an alchemist. I create and I see things from a different lens than most people see them, and that's what I bring.
And was there anything holding you back, or what was holding you back, I know we talked about this, the old order and the mindset of others, perhaps where you lived, but was there anything holding you back from taking that leap into the business world?
Well, I think that there are just seasons of life that go a certain way, and then either, you get a piece of insight or you get a realization or a new connection appears, and then all of a sudden you're on a different track. And, I know that when I first started getting into business and marketing and sales and all that kind of stuff, I was very naive. And a lot of slag needed to be pounded off of me, and then some things changed, and I stopped doing some stupid things, and I started doing some other things, and then things lurched forward. And the way life works is you'll go on a certain set of assumptions for a certain period of time, and then you will find that those assumptions and situations run out of gas, and you need to now grow into a new phase. And what I believe to be true is that you can either wait for the necessity of having to re-engineer your life or take on the next challenge. You can wait until it's forced on you from the outside, or you can actively pursue it and be proactive and stretch yourself on purpose. And I kind of have this philosophy that if I'm stretching myself, then God probably doesn't have to bonk me on the head to get my attention.
How do you stretch yourself?
I am always pressing the envelope. And I'll give you the latest example. I just came out with a brand new book, Evolution 2.0, Breaking the Deadlock Between Darwin and Design. And I spent 6 years writing this book. I put more effort into this than all my other books put together, and I'm not exaggerating. It was a immensely complex and difficult project. And I spent 10 years researching the whole origins question, the evolution question, the creation question, and I found some really interesting answers. This book is going to make some people very mad. It's going to make some other people delighted. I can tell you this. I can tell you that my brother going from Christian to almost atheist is a predictable, systematic, reliable outcome of what most churches are teaching their kids about science.
Okay.
To put a finer point on it, the rank and file will believe whatever the church tells them, even if it's not true. The really curious, inquisitive ones who are the leaders will eventually figure out that it's not true, that the church has made up its own version of science. Now, why has it done that? It's done that because it's afraid of having to incorporate new information into its theology. It believes, sometimes without really admitting or recognizing it, that it is basing its assumptions on 200, 400, 1,000, 1,600-year-old doctrines and stuff, which, now that we know more about the world, don't add up. By the way, this increased my faith. It did not decrease it. Okay. But I ended up having to rearrange a lot of puzzle pieces. Now, I am totally putting myself out on a limb writing a book like this. Okay, and there's a whole history I won't even go into. I mean,
it sounds very interesting.
If you type Perry Marshall atheism into a website, you will find, I mean, Perry Marshall is hated on at least 1,000 atheist websites, and I'm not exaggerating.
Wow.
Okay, you know, I have been harshly criticized, and I'm going to start getting harshly criticized by super conservative creationists too. Well, so be it. You know, the truth is the truth. And so, you know, you read the book, you can disagree, you could agree, whatever. It'll make you think.
I'll check it out.
I'm not telling you what to think, but I'm insisting you do have to think. And so there's always a new level of challenge. So.
Appreciate that, man. Do you have any significant mentors in your life right now?
Oh, yeah.
Who are your most significant mentors?
Well, there are several departments in my life.
Sure.
You know, a couple of mentors on the business side right now are Rob Berkeley and Victor Chang. There's a gentleman named Melvin Pillay. He's a kind of a prophetic coach kind of a guy. There's a lady named Sue Town who's an intercessor that I meet with once a month. You know, there's I have some mentors in the science department of my life.
Let me pin you down on those first four you mentioned. What are the significant bits of advice they've each given you? What if you said, you know what, that person, they always say, or that thing they said to me that really stuck with me was?
You know, Rob and Victor are teaching me how to be a CEO. They're teaching me how to run my business by instruments instead of by sight, like flying an airplane.
Okay.
You know, and I mean that would encapsulate it. Okay. Mm-hmm. On the spiritual side, one of the things I've learned from Melvin is he goes, most people are very kind of scattershot about how they pray and press in for things that they need. And, you know, today they're praying for this guy and the next day they're praying for that guy. And he said, you need to pick one thing and you need to be like the widow with the unjust judge in the parable in the Bible where she just bangs on that guy's door until he relents.
Awesome.
And he goes, you need to set your sight on very audacious, impossible things that only God can do, and you pound the doors of heaven until that one thing goes through. And he goes, that will spike your faith like nothing else. From Sue, is a really interesting, she's like one of the most underrated people. You know how I talked about it's not wise as serpent or gentle as dove, it's both.
Mm-hmm.
She has a law degree from the University of Chicago and worked for years and years as an attorney. And you don't, like, if you know the University of Chicago, like, this is pretty high cotton, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she can go as far as you want to go into the logical, rational, propositional, intellectual, but she can go miles the other direction into the mystical, and she can do both. Mm-hmm. And I'm learning how to do both, and one of the things I'm learning from her is that only God can tell you who you are, and God's only really going to tell you are when you find out who He is. And, if any of us really think we know who God is, we've only scratched the scratch on the scratch of the surface.
Mm.
We barely know. And how deep down that rabbit hole do you really want to go? Well, that's your decision,
Mm.
How much time are you going to put into getting to know God? And everybody is going to find that their path to exploring God is going to be different. Some people it's going to be through art. For some people it's nature. For some people it's science. For some people it's relationships. For most of it's some combination of things. But everybody is going to have their own unique combination of how they seem to get deeper and deeper into the character and person of God. And so, hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea.
That's amazing. Perry, wow. It's been a really refreshing conversation. Just, I guess, if you could tell us where we can find out about you, your website. I know you got a few websites, if there's anyone to share with us. And then I'll ask you for just one parting piece of advice or wisdom for our listeners.
You go to perrymarshall.com, and I would suggest that you read my book, 80/20 Sales and Marketing. I think if there was one book that kind of encapsulated it all and was capable of saving anybody 5 years of pain and suffering in their sales and marketing profession, that would be it. And you can get it on our website. We sell it for a penny plus shipping, actually.
Okay.
We actually sell it at a Lawson. It's a great way for us to get new customers. Buy 80/20 Sales and Marketing for $7 in the U.S. or $14 outside the U.S. and let the book essentially be my gift to you, and see if it doesn't change your life. And if I have one piece of advice, it's know yourself. Know how God's gifted you. One of the things in the 80/20 book is it's got access to the marketing DNA test, which costs $37. But there's a special link inside the book where you can get it for free. And that test tells you how you persuade and sell.
Okay.
Everybody persuades and sells differently. And if you don't understand how you persuade and sell, then you'll be trying to use somebody else's formula. And that is, I found most of the reason when somebody can't sell anything, that's why. It's because they don't understand their natural, innate sales formula. And so know yourself. God gave you a set of gifts, talents, abilities, and that is a little treasure box that only you can pry open and explore.
Amazing. Perry Marshall, thank you so much for your time today. I feel lifted, Perry. I feel encouraged. I feel inspired. And I really appreciate you for just being so open and just sharing your years of experience and wisdom with us today. Thank you
Errol,
so much.
Thank you. And thank you for your great questions. I mean, these were really good questions. And, I kind of had to pry myself open a little bit, to do a good job for you. So
that's good, man.
Thank you.
Thank you, man. God bless you.
You too.
All right. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to the Rising Generation Leadership Podcast. Please take time to go to our iTunes page and to share and like our podcast and share it with your friends. We really appreciate you. God bless you.